Welcome to Jessup Think. I'm your host, Mark Moore.
And your co-host, Rex Gurney.
And today, Rex, on the show, we're going to talk about what everyone has been talking about, and that is the coronavirus pandemic.
Okay. And you probably noticed that we are actually not in our studio, but we are doing this from the comfort of our own. I don't know. Where are you at, Mark?
I'm in my guest room, actually.
Okay. Okay. I'm in our guest room turned office. And so,
Hey, there you go.
there
Both
you go.
both guest rooms.
Yep. There we go. There we
That's
go.
perfect. And we got our own little studios for school and now for the podcast. And we really want to focus in today's episode is just kind of highlighting the a Christian response maybe to everything that's going on. There's been so much on the news,
And
so many
it changes
responses.
daily. It's just, it's all over the place.
It does, yeah. You could kind of think you know something one day, and within a
Right.
couple hours, it
Right.
changes.
Right.
And there's also been a lot that maybe Christians have put online and different responses to this, and we just kind of
Mhm.
want to cover, hey, what does it look like to be a Christian maybe in the middle of this pandemic, and what are
Mhm.
some of our responsibilities, and what are some of our actions and reactions to
Right.
this?
Right. Right.
And like you said, Rex, we are not in the studio today. We are zooming away from the studio there at Jessup, staying safe. How are you doing during this quarantine?
I'm actually working more than I usually do, which is interesting because, it's not like I'm going anywhere, and that computer is always staring at me, and those Jessup emails are always staring at me. And so I don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing. I have to actually just deliberately like put my phone away and, at a certain
Hmm.
time of the evening, just so that I don't just work all the time.
Right. I know it's true. And it's probably for so many people who are listening to the podcast that now they're working at home.
Right.
I have found that I'm working more. And yeah, it's
Exactly.
because the computer's
Exactly.
always there. I can always sit down and grade a little bit more.
Right.
I
Right.
can answer
Right.
another email.
Right.
And so
Right.
you do
Right.
have to kind of find this kind of balance, right?
Right.
You have to have,
And something else, for those of you who may not only be listening, but it's possible that there might be some video with this podcast where we're going to we're all in sort of uncharted territory right now. So we decided on the podcast to do the same thing. And you probably noticed that there's a handsome guy with a beard there, and then there's Rex Gurney. And so now you know pretty much what we look like. Both I guess bearded wonders here, but you
hey,
notice the
that's right.
gravitas that comes with the beard.
That's
That's why we do it.
exactly.
That's why we do
And
it.
I've been encouraging people kind of during this time of quarantine. It's a great time to grow a beard. So,
Well, it may be
I,
more than that actually, because it just sort of dawned on me like sometime last week that depending on how long this is, and depending on if this thing spins into the summer, um, then I might not be able to get a haircut for like 3 months. And so if I can't get a haircut for 3 months, I might just throw caution to the wind and come back to school next fall with a ponytail. We'll see.
oh, there
We'll
we go.
see. We'll see.
I'm looking forward to that. You heard it here on the podcast. There's going to be a Rex Gurney ponytail.
Right, right, right.
Go just full John the Baptist on everybody. Just let your
Sure,
hair
sure.
out, let your beard
Actually, I
grow.
already did that. I had my midlife crisis about 15 years ago, and I decided to grow my hair like it was in college. And so I kind of, that might have been a little bit before you got here, but
I
I
think it
also
was
weighed like
before my
I
time.
I also weigh like 40 pounds more than I do right now, and so it was not a pretty picture. My gray long hair. Anyway, I'm glad I got all that out of my system
Well,
right now.
well,
But
hey,
hey,
the listeners and viewers may want to see that later.
yeah,
So we'll keep people
we'll,
posted on
we'll see what
Instagram.
happens.
You can
We'll
check
see what
out
happens.
these. But yeah, as we kind of look at this global pandemic and like you said, Rex, I mean, we're all really in uncharted territory.
Right.
Now, what's interesting is this isn't uncharted territory for humanity
No, or for Christians, actually.
or for Christians. Yeah, that's such a
Right,
good point.
right, right,
That pandemics, plagues, epidemics have been a part of our history and have come in so many different times. And so I think it is important for us to kind of have that historical perspective. I know we always
right,
throw in a little history with you, Rex, and I think it's important because we can kind of feel like, oh, this is maybe the first time we're experiencing this. But and it is for our generation, right, and
Right,
for a
right,
generation.
right.
But this is a common human experience.
It is, and you know, it's sort of interesting, I guess, because especially because I'm kind of a middle baby boomer, and so we just sort of thought we would escape all this stuff, that
Right,
this stuff that happened to maybe our grandparents and might happen to our grandchildren, but it's certainly not going to happen to us because honestly, we've had it so good so long. It's just true.
right.
But here you go. It's been 100 years pretty much. Actually, it hasn't been 100 years, which is really interesting. I've been reading up on a lot of this, and people are talking about, and some of our listeners may even remember this. I don't, mainly because I was a toddler, but the whole polio scare in the
Hmm.
1950s. I mean, apparently people were social distancing for that back in the
Yeah,
1950s. And of course, everybody, if you didn't know about it, you know about it now, the 1918 influenza epidemic. Um,
yeah. The Spanish
um,
flu, as
and,
it's called.
we often think about the Black Death in the 1300s, but
Hmm.
that wasn't the first time the plague ever, came and decimated parts of humanity. There was a horrible plague in the 500s. Sometimes they call it Justinian's plague,
Wow,
and perhaps up to a third to a half of the people in the Byzantine Empire actually
wow.
died. Um,
Yeah,
and and then for those of our listening audience that know Roman history, during the third century, which would be the 200s, Rome uh, came really close to falling apart. In fact,
yeah.
it did sort of semi fall apart for a while and split
Right,
into three different empires. But um, part of the issue of that horrible century was waves and waves of what they called and we would call the plague would just decimate communities in the Roman
yeah.
Empire. And this is before Constantine, which means this is before Christianity became legal and recognized. So
Right.
we had these plagues that are devastating, especially urban areas of the Roman Empire, and you have still what is in some ways an underground church that is responding to all of this and living through all of this with their fellow citizens in the Roman Empire. And
Right.
that gets really interesting because many scholars think that this actually was a real um, it was sort of good propaganda for the early Christian church because
Hmm.
of their response basically to what was happening.
Oh, yeah.
If you had any means at all and you had your villa out in the countryside, you would just take off and you would just leave the poor urban masses to just rot, fester, and die, pretty much, right?
Yeah.
Christians wouldn't do that. And not only would they not just, take care of their own, they would take care of the pagan abandon also.
Hmm.
And people noticed that, and they noticed that there was something really, really different about that. Um, that was really a good sign for the growth of the church, actually.
Yeah, that's really interesting too that that kind of wraps into this idea of response to
Right,
these
right.
pandemics, right? That at that
Because,
time,
yeah,
its response actually showed the
right,
church as something different
right.
and
And we are
responding.
responding right now. In,
Yeah, we are. And
in
it
good
is
way.
really interesting
Yeah.
to kind of see some of the different responses. And before we get to the Christian response, because
Okay.
we'll talk about that, I do think it's interesting, and it kind of highlights what you were saying, maybe for the middle baby boomers. But I think in some ways it's kind of this. It was a mindset that came from modernity, but it's kind of this mindset that hey, we are growing and developing and advancing in all of these
Oh, for
areas.
sure. For sure.
We have nature under control,
Right.
right?
Ever
And then it
onward, ever upward. That's right.
Right. And then it's something like this. It's something like a pandemic that I think makes everyone realize, whoa, we don't have this under
No,
control.
we do not. We do not.
Yeah, and there's so much that we don't know, and so I think that's been interesting, and in many ways, it's kind of put us all in a level playing field
It's
that
really been
we
a helpless feeling for people like me,
right.
and my generation that really felt that we did,
Yeah.
and now and now we're like, you know, possibly the segment of the population that may be most
Right. Yeah.
vulnerable right now to that.
Right. Now it's interesting too. I did hear one kind of what I would call funny response to
Okay.
this. And it was in kind of a newspaper article, which this has actually been kind of great for the news industry. So newspapers are doing well. So it's some rise, some fall.
Right. Right.
But I was reading this, and someone it was from a younger generation, and they made this claim about the pandemic. They were like, "We didn't ask for this," and I thought, well, I hope not. Like, is
Who
anyone
would ask for this, right?
right? Like, I mean,
God
maybe
might smite and smote my enemies.
right. I mean, like maybe someone, maybe some student out there was like, God, I need to get out of this semester, or I need to get out of school, but no one's asking for a global pandemic. So I
Right.
was like, well, that's just kind of an interesting,
Right. Right.
interesting response. And then, of course, now with everyone being kind of quarantined for the most part, I mean, like they're saying almost 3/4 of the U.S. now will be kind of under stay-at-home. By the time we're recording this, it'll be stay-at-home kind of orders, and so more people are online, and more people are sharing things and making videos and making
And that can actually
TikToks.
affect your mental and spiritual health too, actually. So for my own, sanity and actually my own, Christian hope, about a week and a half ago, I decided to delete a lot of my news apps off of my
Oh,
phone and take the shortcuts off of my computer. And
yeah.
just look at some of the local stuff because I've got to know,
Mm-hmm.
what you can and cannot do, and I have to know what the latest information is. But there's just so much stuff out there that's just not helpful on both sides.
Right.
Either the sky is completely falling and this is like the death and knell of humanity, or it's nothing. And
Right.
so it's neither one of those things are helpful.
Yeah, and it's true. Like I think that especially in a time of 24-hour news,
Right.
it isn't helpful all the time just to have it on. And some people now working at home maybe just have it on in the background all day,
Mhm.
and
Right.
yeah, it can really be overwhelming. And so I think that's
Which is
good
difficult for
good
me because
advice.
I mean I'm a history professor, and
Right.
part of that is you're supposed to, sort of this is a historical moment. I mean it is. People
Yeah,
will write about this in the future,
that's so
and
true.
you want to be mindful of what's going on, but you also need to be mindful of your own spiritual health too,
Yeah,
so that you can write about this stuff if indeed you do personally survive it. And so I just needed to stop listening to everything.
right. I think that's good, and that's just kind of good advice. And it was interesting. One of the things that started to go around kind of online, and actually one of my sons showed this to me, was people were kind of throwing around the passage out of Second Chronicles 7:13 to 14, specifically out of the Good News Bible, so the GNB version.
Okay.
And it says this, it says, whenever I hold back the rain or send locusts to eat up the crops or send an epidemic on my people, if they pray to me and repent and turn away from the evil they have been doing, then I will hear them in heaven, forgive their sins, and make their land prosperous again. And it was kind of being put around online saying, hey, look at the beginning of 2020 with all the fires in Australia because of no rain. And apparently there is a locust kind of epidemic happening in Africa right now. Then obviously the global pandemic. And I just, when my son was kind of showing me that, I was like, well, I can see how someone reading that,
Sure.
particularly maybe in the GMB, could be like, whoa, that seems to be speaking directly to what's happening. And I was fascinated because it's actually a really good example of how we can take some certain passages from scripture and maybe misapply them, or if we don't
Right.
kind of
Right.
start with the proper context.
Right.
And sometimes it does look like they fit just perfectly with modern day kind of happenings, and we have to kind of pause real quick and say, okay, let's look at maybe the context. And one thing, even beyond that, because this what's interesting is this is in the context of Solomon dedicating the temple. So it's really in a joyous time that's happening for the Hebrew people. And but one thing that I'm always cautious of anytime something like this happens, anytime a big event in history or a big catastrophe
Mhm.
happens, I'm always mindful of us. trying to make that direct connection with causation and God. That, oh,
Sure,
God must be
sure,
causing this
sure,
to judge us.
sure.
Um, and maybe why do you think we're often quick to make that connection?
Well, there's a whole lot there and a whole lot behind there. Immediately, what the image that came to my mind was, when Hurricane Katrina came through,
Hmm.
and people were showing images of the Doppler radar, and the Doppler radar looked somewhat like a human fetus, and so, and that was like everywhere on the internet, or in
Yeah.
certain Christian corners of the internet,
Hmm.
and that was like, proof that God was sending Hurricane Katrina to punish. And this is where it got kind of fuzzy, but it hit New Orleans, but to sort of punish America, for, our sin of legalized abortion.
Right.
And once again, when there's a devastating earthquake in Haiti,
Hmm.
God sends this to Haiti, 200 years later, interestingly enough, in order to punish them for something that happened 200 years ago, because they apparently made a deal with the devil in order to get independence from France. And there's all sorts of things going on there. But I think the deeper thing with this is our kind of response to, how we feel about, theodicy, when
Mm.
especially what we would call natural evil, right?
Yeah. Right.
So earthquake, hurricane, pandemic,
Hmm.
and since the rain seems to fall on the just and the unjust alike with this, then,
Right.
one, you know possible way to do at it is what's God trying to teach us through
Hmm.
this, or punish us for, or whatever. You look for that causation, um, um, because that's one answer, actually, to, what people call natural evil. There are other Christian answers to that, but
Right.
that is a not uncommon one, and of course you're seeing it, obviously, right now.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting to kind of bring up that theodicy question, right? So when we talk about theodicy, we're looking at how do we reconcile God's justice and kind of the evil that we see in the world, and particularly here, like you're saying, Rex, natural evils, and saying, okay, God, and yeah, and so Christian responses in the past have been maybe a direct connection to judgment. Um, and then another one has been kind of that teaching one, right? Kind of the we would
Hmm.
call pedagogical
Hmm.
approach. And I think that those have some elements of where they can help us understand maybe some events, but they also, for me, always kind of uh, make me take a step back and say, whoa, do I really want to put everything of this onto God and that God is saying, okay, now I'm going to take my time to judge the whole world with this type of pandemic. And like you said, the rain falls on the just and the unjust. So it's not just all people who are unjust who would be getting it. And that's why I always want to be cautious. Now, what that doesn't mean is that in the midst of a global pandemic, we can't ask ourselves, hey, what is God teaching me in the midst of this global
Sure,
pandemic?
sure.
But that's different than causation, right? Why
This is
has
the
God
question.
caused this to teach me? That's different.
It's very different, right?
And and I think it is important to kind of maybe ask ourselves, especially in a time where we get to slow down, our normal routines are kind of broken, and we're approaching our life differently. This is a great time to be like, whoa, how have I been living my life? What has been really important to me that in these last 2 weeks isn't important anymore?
Right, right. And that's something that I've been thinking, um, very deeply on, and spending a lot of time, which I have a lot of time to do
Yeah,
right
you got
now,
time to
actually.
spare.
Um, um, you know, my real concern and anxiety, I guess, is not so much, am I going to get COVID-19, and am I going to survive it if I get it,
Hmm.
and that either will happen or not, and what will happen with that will be what it is and what it's not, and I'm pretty much at peace with that. Um, um, but I am kind of concerned over what's going to happen on the other side of this.
Hmm.
Not just to the wider society, but to the Christian, to my people,
Yeah.
because there have been some very helpful things that you're already seeing, and there's
Hmm.
some perhaps unhelpful things that you're already seeing.
Right.
The best and the worst of our nature, actually, and both of those things are on display, and it's just going to be interesting to see how that plays out on the other side of this.
Yeah, and I think that it brings up a good point because it allows for us maybe right now to recognize that this is an opportunity for the church to really be the church and to really shine.
Right,
Um,
right.
and it also then means it's an opportunity for us to stick our foot in our mouth too.
We
So
certainly have more resources than the third century Christians did in
yeah,
Smyrna or Rome.
right.
Certainly. We're also in a very different social position, though, from that too, which is which
That's
is
so true.
which is interesting.
Hmm.
So I know that some of my people, because they're my people. One thing I really try not to do is, even if I personally have some issues that folks, my fellow believers do, to not try to disassociate myself from them, because I
Right.
am still one of them. They're my
Yeah.
people. They're my people.
And
And
that's
so
good because it's easy to be like, oh, I just want to distance
for
myself.
sure, for sure. And I just don't want to go there, because it's not true, because they are my people.
Hmm.
But at the same time, my people are doing some things that are not helpful, and my people are doing some things that are helpful. And
Yeah.
so my people are seeing ways that they can not only minister to those in their own congregations, but perhaps um, really care about the common good. And maybe we can actually talk about that a little bit more later on in the podcast, because I
Yeah.
think that's a really interesting um, and very Christian concept that is
Hmm.
talked about a lot, even with questions of whether I should keep my church open or not.
Right. Yeah.
So I see the best of it, but then I also see, and I know it's not all the pagans out there that are doing this. It's my
Hmm.
people that are going out and hoarding.
Right.
It's my people,
Yeah.
and so it's the best and the worst.
Yep.
And I understand that, because my people are people, and
Hmm.
people do what people do when they're
Yeah.
under this kind of pressure, right?
Right.
You just hope that redeemed people would at least think twice about it before they just ran out and buy all the toilet paper.
Right. Exactly. I know. I mean,
But
literally, toilet
but it
paper
happens.
is gone. It's gone
It happens.
forever. And that I really like that because it helps us understand that in a moment of scarcity, in the
Mhm.
moment of a pandemic, we can we can actually choose as a church to have a mindset that's different than everyone else, right? But
Right.
it is tough because we are people and we have moments of panic and moments of,
Right.
and it is unnerving. You go to a store and there's literally no toilet paper. Even though I wasn't going there to buy toilet paper at all, I was still like, maybe
It's
we
not
should buy toilet paper.
hardly any ice cream either. That's really
I
interesting.
know. Hey, what's going
So
on with the ice cream
it's,
hoarders? Maybe
it's
people
great,
have deep freezes
right?
there.
Well, honestly, I mean, I know people that have gone to Home Depot and Lowe's, and it's like, within the first couple of days of a possible shutdown, that people would just, I mean, literally, they cleaned out those places of freezers that you would shove
Right.
in the garage, just like, come on,
Yeah.
people.
And it's really interesting to have to battle that within ourselves
Right,
as a church of saying, hey, this is not a time just for me to hoard and protect, but I can take care of myself and look to take care of other people. And I have this, it's actually a quote from Martin Luther, who his city of Wittenberg was also going through an outbreak of the bubonic plague. It was in the mid 16th century, early 16th century, about 1527. And a fellow pastor kind of asked him, hey, how should we respond? How should I handle this situation? And this is Luther's response, which I think is great. He says, I shall ask God mercifully to protect us. So Luther's saying, first off, I'm just going to ask God, please
sure,
protect us.
sure.
Then I shall fumigate, help purify the air, administer medicine and take it. I shall avoid places and persons where my presence is not needed, in order not to become contaminated and thus perchance inflict and pollute others, and so cause
Right.
their death as a result
Right.
of my negligence. If God should wish to take me, he will surely find me. And that's kind of what you're saying, Rex. Like, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen. Uh, and I have done what he has expected of me. And so I'm not responsible for either my own death or the death of others. And I like what he says here. If my neighbor needs me, however, I shall not avoid place or person, but will go freely as stated above. See, this is such a God fearing faith because it is neither brash nor foolhardy and does not tempt God.
That is an amazing quote. That
Yeah,
is
and it's
wonderful.
so fitting. A friend from church sent that to me, and I just thought, wow, that just perfectly fits because, yeah, I think a response we can have right away is one to pray, like,
Right.
hey,
Right.
God, would you protect us? Would you protect our city, protect our friends, our family, and then also do our part of sanitizing everything and
Maintaining
being
some social distance.
right
Just,
and
as
maintaining
awkward
social
as it is,
distance.
to do that for the common good, actually,
Right.
which is interesting, right?
Yeah, and
Um,
I think that's the way to. I love how Luther helps us understand that it is that it's actually for the good of others
right.
to do those. So
And the
it's
Christian, and the church in the third century, it's like we don't just take
mhm,
care of our own; we take care of you all too.
right.
And so, if the rain falls on the just and the unjust, the healing that we can do is going to also be for everybody,
Yeah.
and that's a wonderful thing. Um, um,
And I
yeah,
think like what you were saying, Rex, too, we do need to, in this time, it can be easy. And sometimes on a podcast, it's easy to kind of highlight how the church gets it wrong, right? We can
right,
focus, but I do think that it is important to, and we can recognize that and say, hey, that's like we are Christians. These are our people, but we disagree. So we can
mhm,
recognize those moments. But I do think it is important for us to recognize too the countless churches who
right,
are looking for their neighbors and are doing it in a responsible way.
right, right.
It's not just about holding Sunday services. I think that's what's really interesting about these last couple weeks is that I think it's helping the church realize church is so much more than a Sunday service. Right?
And more than that, so much more than a Sunday service in a specific location that you have a mortgage on.
Yes. Yeah,
And
exactly.
I do I mean, I'm very cognizant of the financial implications of all of this and everything, and I
Right.
understand that, and I think those things are really important. But um, we all know, and I'm pretty sure all of our listeners know too, that the church is not a building. This is becoming very,
Mhm.
very evident,
Yeah.
and this is also sort of forcing us to actually have to confront that.
Hmm.
If I can't physically go down with my, with my fellow believers and worship in our place at a specific time
Yep.
together, and that's church, like I go to church, right? And I
Hmm.
know because I've been taught in Sunday school that the church is actually the body of Christ, and it's not that.
Right. Yeah. We know the right answer.
We know the
Right.
right answers, but now it's like, well, this is where those right answers you have to pay attention to these right answers,
Hmm.
and I'm finding um, that's a very good thing,
Yeah.
and it's a thing a lot of us are struggling with and struggling the best way to do that.
Yep.
Um, but if it's a appreciation and discovery of what the church really is, that cannot possibly be anything but a good thing.
Yeah. That it's helping us realize the things we already knew that church isn't a building, a single location.
Now I
And
can say that since I actually am not a pastor.
yeah, that's true.
Back, I mean, I did pastor for 9 years. Back in the
Right.
day, I might have a different, set of concerns,
Yeah.
if I was just concerned about the building, that would be totally understandable. But you don't want the real lessons to be missed with
Hmm.
this, and we could come out of this actually in a much better place.
Yeah.
We really could.
I really think we will. And even at the church community that I'm a part of, I've seen people actually grow closer together in connection because they've had to reach out to each other
Right, right,
via social media,
right,
writing letters to each other, phone
right,
calls,
right.
and it's actually maybe connected people more than just having a physical location where you go And I think that it is, when we are on the other side of this, I think as a church, we're going to need to be mindful that we don't fall back into that same rhythm
Right.
of just going to a location and then being like, hey, I'm a part of this community, but
Right.
actually being a part, diving in, connecting with people, and then also looking out for those around us, right? So now it's not just the church, and church locations have been doing great. I know even from our community, there's like a food drop off that's been happening once a week, or a
Good.
food handout,
Mhm.
and other churches are doing really well at that. But I think this is also helping us realize that in my own home, isolated from everyone, I can then be the church. So I can look
Mhm.
for my neighbor who is a widow and in her 80s, and I can ask her, hey, do you need me to go to the grocery store for you, or do you need me to pick up anything? Or the mom across the street who is like, if you see Ritz crackers, pick them up because I can't find them anywhere, and
Yeah.
my 2-year-old only eats Ritz crackers.
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
It is
and and that's a way for us to connect and help. and
right.
and I think that's the way during this pandemic, man, for the church to really show who we are. And maybe this is helping us kind of reorient
Right.
our focus and get a better grasp on what is truly important.
Right.
And
Right.
I agree with you. If we come out of this on the other end with a better set of priorities and a better understanding of what's really important, man, that's only good for the church. It's only good for our nation and our
Right.
culture.
Right. I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you.
I want to. I think we can kind of maybe land, Rex, on looking at this word hope and this idea of hope, because I think during this time, for me, it's been a word I keep coming back to. Like, what does it mean to have hope? And I've always loved this quote from Henry Nouwen. And Henry Nouwen, again, I've said it on the podcast before. He's like my number one spiritual writer of all time. He, in heaven, I'm going to be like, oh, Jesus, awesome. Where's Henry? Can we talk? I need to talk about some of these books. Um,
Get in line, right?
yeah, exactly. I know there'll probably be a long line.
Pick a number and talk to Henry. But you have all the time in the world,
Yeah,
Mark.
but we got time. We got
Right.
time.
Right.
So, but I love this. He does this comparison between optimism and hope and
Hmm.
how they're different. And it's been so just impactful in my own life. He says this. He says optimism and hope are radically different attitudes. Optimism is the expectation that things like the weather, human relationships, the economy, the political situation, a global pandemic, I'm adding that, and so on, will get better. Hope is the trust that God will fulfill God's promises to us in a way that leads us to true freedom.
Hmm.
The optimist speaks about concrete changes in the future. The person of hope lives in the moment with the knowledge and trust that all of life is in good hands.
That's really good stuff.
And I
Yeah.
love that idea that it's easy in the middle of a pandemic to think about the future, right? Oh, one day it'll get better. One day we'll be back to normal. And you can almost live kind of paralyzed. You're thinking about how it used to be in the past, and you're thinking about how it's going to get better in the future. But God is calling us to live in the present
Right. Right.
and live with
Right.
hope in the present moment.
Right. As the
And
body of Christ in the present. That's right.
yeah, so I just think it's so important. It's something I've been focusing on, that, man, how can I not miss this present moment? Not just thinking about the future, but man, that God is in control. All of life is in good hands, no matter what happens. And I can focus on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Rex, thank you for joining me on the show.
Yeah. So I have a question before we go.
Okay, yeah, I like
Are you
this.
sick of Zoom yet, Mark?
Oh man, I am zooming
I
all
got the
day.
Zoom crick in my neck actually from so many
Exactly.
meetings and classes.
I
Yeah.
think one thing that might happen to me after this is I may live the rest of my life just on Zoom. I may
Okay.
just only
Okay.
Zoom into places. I'll
Yeah,
never
that's sort of
actually
all of us
leave my
here
house.
actually. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, as an introvert, there's kind of positives and negatives to
Oh
this
yeah. Oh
experience.
yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm not afraid, like I'm not itching to get out and meet people. But what I've also noticed is that as an introvert now stuck at home with everyone, like their introvert has no place to hide,
Yes.
right? So now the introvert has to become the extrovert because they're the only ones there to
Yeah,
talk
yeah.
to.
There's a realignment of a lot of our stuff that probably is really necessary that's happening right now.
Right.
If we'll just take advantage of the moment
Yep.
that God has given us.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, let's take advantage of that moment and thank the listeners for tuning in. We hope you all stay safe.
Exactly.
And we'll see you
Keep your social
again.
distance. We're Mark and I are across town from each other right now. So
Exactly. We got way more than 6 feet
we're
between us
trying to
right
do our
now.
part.
That's right. You guys stay safe out there. We'll see you again soon.